weekend to all of you. And since most of my favorite YouTubers are taking a break this weekend, I thought I would provide a quick update on what I'm seeing in the market. Now, starting with the S&P 500, we can see that we saw obviously one of the largest corrections we have seen this entire cycle, which was almost as much as the entire 2022 bear market, and obviously not quite as much as the COVID crash, but literally twice that of our whole run up, everything we've seen in 2023 and 2024. Now, obviously, we dumped into an important 50% level, which I don't have marked up on my chart personally, but if you want to head over to any of Jason and Michael Pizzino's videos, they talk about that in a bit more detail. We've seen this lovely bounce out of it, but unfortunately we started to sell off again. Now on this indicator over here, which is the BX Trender, which I have stolen from the Traders Helping Traders community, which is still free at the moment. So if you want to head over there and sign up yourself, obviously the private academy is going to be awesome, but you can actually access a lot of the courses for free at the moment. So enough of the shill. The BX Trender is still making lower lows, which technically means this bottom here is not confirmed yet. What you want to be seeing is you want to be seeing higher lows to show that the bottom is in. So you want to see some really nice buying like what we saw here in October of 2023, which obviously gave us some higher lows and a massive run up. Now, obviously, this indicator here is free. You can use my settings and the one that Peter teaches over in his course and go test it yourself. But basically, what I'm saying is whilst there is a really good probability that the low is in, we just don't have the confirmation that we need. Now, over to the NASDAQ, we can see that this looks even worse than the S&P 500, simply because whilst the S&P 500, the monthly 1-bar chart is still up, the NASDAQ monthly 1-bar chart is down. Now, this is the TIA Gann Swing Indicator, which you can find over at TIA Crypto, which Jason and Michael use in all their YouTube videos, and it's just another indicator that I use, and it is a paid indicator, but it's a lot more powerful than most of the basic free indicators, like the other ones that I'm showing. So we've seen a higher low the week before, and then we've seen a lower low being made. So we've seen some really nice buying pressure, but we started to sell off again. Now, as you can see, in an uptrend, we can see people who think the low is in, I'm going to buy the dip, and then it ends up dipping again. Now, obviously, it could dip just an extra 2 or 3% and then be off on a massive run up. So this obviously doesn't mean if you bought the dip here, sell everything because we're going to crash to 10,000 points. It just means the low is now not confirmed, and it is possible that we sell off slightly lower. But obviously, it's also possible that we do not sell off slightly lower and we end up making a higher low like we did through here in September last year and being off to the races. But anyways, we'll take a quick look at the Magnificent 7. Microsoft, same story. It looked like the low was in, but we sold off again. So this low is now no longer confirmed. Nvidia, same story. We saw our higher low on the BX Trender. Looked like the low was in, but then we sold off again. Tesla is actually looking a lot better than the others because we have made 2 consecutive weeks of higher lows on the BX Trender. And compared to the other stocks, if we look at the Gann Swing Indicator, Tesla, we are still up on the monthly 1-bar and the weekly 2-bar, which even Nvidia, which has been leading this cycle, has not been. So another thing we can see on Tesla is we have sold off almost perfectly into the institutional buy zone, the 786 to the 828 Fibonacci, which you can watch a full video on over at, what's it called again? Traders Helping Traders. There is an entire video on the Smart Money course, which obviously, as I said, is still free at the moment. And another thing we can see is we've got this really lovely double bottom right here. So I'm thinking that the low for Tesla is likely in until something says otherwise, such as a lower low on the BX trender or a, obviously, price actually breaking that low. So what do I think will happen with Tesla? Well, I think Tesla will move up to potentially the 50 TMA right here, which is a strategy that Cowboy Trades talks about over in his channel and one of my favorite indicators personally. Now that indicator right now is sitting around $291. Another thing we can look at is the market bias, which is another thing that Peter talks about over at Capitalist Academy. That is at $295, and then we've got the 50% level over at $315, which is one of Jason and Michael Pizzino's favorite things to use. So obviously, when it comes to buying and holding, Tesla, you can have a look. It's probably not the cleanest trend to just buy and hold for years and years and years, but even a move up here to just 300 or a bit above and below is a 20-something% trade, which is absolutely worth taking in my opinion. Now, if you do like taking trades, you can also sign up to the free newsletter over Traders Helping Traders, which I thought I had open earlier, but I must have accidentally closed it. So I will just cut this video and get right back to you. All right, now you can get this newsletter delivered to your inbox for free from Traders Helping Traders, which is run by Peter at Capitalist Academy. And honestly, the amount of information in this for free is actually amazing. Like, he'll tell you what he's watching, the time frame, all of the indicators that he goes over, targets, invalidations, as well as time horizons, and even his confidence level and all of that. So obviously it's not a copy this setup to the teeth thing, although technically you could do that. But the fact that he's giving you all of the educational stuff over on his academy for free, as well as basically weekly updates, is really, really nice. So I think pretty much everyone should go and sign up to this right now. Obviously, you can do the same with TIA Crypto. There is a free weekly newsletter, in which case they also send you trade setups. Now, obviously the premium membership is where everything's at, whether you're wanting to join Traders Helping Traders or TIA Crypto. Having one-on-one guidance and weekly live streams is obviously better than just getting sent a weekly newsletter. Now, where is the free weekly newsletter? It's over here at Free Report, so you can just chuck in your email and all of that right there. But anyways, I will get back to my analysis now. Continuing on with our Magnificent Seven, we move on to Google. Same story. We have seen a nice sell-off. Well, not very nice sell-off for anyone that's been holding since up here. We got our bounce, higher low on the BX trender, and we have seen another sell-off. Now, Google is in a slightly better position than Nvidia, Microsoft, S&P 500, and the NASDAQ, because our weekly 2-bar chart is up. Now, obviously the weekly 2-bar chart moves a bit slower than the weekly 1-bar chart. If I turn on the swing line to show you what it's doing, it's basically cutting out a lot more of the noise. If you have a look here, basically the weekly 2-bar chart is in green and the weekly 1-bar chart is in orange. So obviously if you go over and join TIA Crypto, you can watch Jason and Michael's videos as they show you exactly how to use all of these charts. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you exactly how to trade with the indicator because that would just be giving away their hard work for free. But yeah, it is a very useful tool for your trading. Apple, Again, not looking great. We've got downtrends across the board, and we are just continually making lower lows and lower lows on the BX trender. Even that bounce there was not strong enough for us to get even a single higher low. So maybe I should stop buying Apple products since their stock price is continuing to disappoint me. I say this as I'm recording on a MacBook. Meta, same thing. We are neutral on the weekly 2-bar chart, which is similar to Google and looking better than Apple, but still not as good as Tesla. Unfortunately, we are still making lower lows on the BX trender. So again, obviously that means the bottom is not confirmed. Next up, Amazon, same story. We've seen a single higher low before making another lower low. Netflix, we are down weekly 1-bar and weekly 2-bar, but at least we are neutral on the monthly time frame, which pretty much everything except Apple is, and obviously the NASDAQ. But Netflix has actually gone over 1,000, I think it's at 1,013 post-market trading before it closed due to earnings report, obviously. And we do have that lovely higher low. So if anyone got in before earnings, like I did, congratulations to you. You are now up a very sizable chunk, especially if you bought down at the lows. That would be 20% nearly in just, is it 20%? No, not 20%. It would be like 15, 17% in just 2 weeks. So congratulations to anyone that has traded that. Another thing that I really like about Netflix compared to the others is that we are still holding support on the market bias, which is another indicator that is talked about over at Traders Helping Traders, and there's a full course on it. Basically, this indicator is really similar to a bull market support band, which both are free, and obviously you can use whichever one works for you. I find it easier to read than a bull market support band, but the prices are very similar, so if you've got a strategy that works on one, you could probably tailor it to the other, but I just like to use the one that I got taught how to use. Anyway, enough talking. Yeah, this single line has been our bull market support, and if you had bought every time we pulled back into it, like the strategy calls for, and sold every time that we moved very far away from it, like had a couple of straight up weeks, you would have made a lot of money. Or you could have just bought and hold the first time that we broke above it, and you would be up over 300%, probably about 350%. Now, enough talk there. If we look at all the other indicators, you can see that Amazon has sold off well below it. Meta has sold off below it, but not that much below it. Apple, yeah, we're below it. We are zoomed out way too far, but you can see, same with Google. We have lost our support, which was acting as really good support for a long time. Same with Tesla, but obviously we do have that BX trender signal, as well as our smart money level signal, and obviously same as Nvidia. So this crash has been incredibly brutal for almost everything out there. Same story with Microsoft. So before I talk about my trades, let's have a quick look at MicroStrategy and Coinbase, the crypto stocks. Over to MicroStrategy, and we can see that we have the same signal as Tesla. We've got 2 consecutive weeks of higher lows on the BX trender, and we are also still holding the market bias, which has been support since, well, pretty much the start of the cycle. Over at the end of 2022, start of 2023. Now, another very interesting thing with MicroStrategy is we are actually up on the weekly 1-bar chart, which just about no other stocks are. Obviously, the weekly 2-bar chart is still down and the monthly chart is still neutral. But one thing that I really like is smart money has stepped in to buy this dip up before we sold off into the smart money zone. So people are taking interest in MicroStrategy at higher prices. Now, I'm drawing this run up from the August low into the Trump pump, blow off top, I guess we could call it. But one thing we should be aware of is we are approaching this 50% level at $323, which we have sold off at once, twice, I guess you could count it 3 times already. So depending on how you look at it on a lower term time frame, this could be a 4th time breakout, which is one of the signals that Michael Pizzino talks about heaps over on his channel. Since breaking below that 50% level, we could count this as our one. Actually, I will draw it out for you if I can remember how the drawing tool works. So we could count that as 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not a really clean setup, just because it's easier on crypto than it is on stocks, because you don't have gaps and all of that thing. But that being said, I am absolutely watching for a setup like that and a move potentially towards this cluster here where we have support resistance up around 370. So again, that is a potential 20% move. We've got a whole bunch of signals lining up for it, but we will just have to see, I guess. Trading is a game of probabilities. Over to Coinbase, again, we have 2 weeks of higher lows on the BX trender, and we are still down on the weekly 1 bar and 2 bar time frame, but we are neutral on the monthly time frame. And this is another of the stocks that where's this? Peter talked about in his weekly watch list, if I can find it here for you somewhere. Coinbase, where we could see a target move up to $260. Now, in my opinion, I think we will meet a lot of resistance up at $218 and $235, simply because this is where the 50 TMA and the market bias sits. But obviously, at $240, we've got previous support, potential resistance now. So, who knows? $260 would probably line up with this line up here, which I haven't even drawn, but you can see previous tops, recent lows. So either way, I think it is a decent trade. We could see a 15, 20-ish% move. Honestly, a lot of these stocks look like decent trades at the moment, but nothing looks like a really good buy and hold. But speaking of trading, we have to talk about AMD, because we have got all these signals that I've been talking about. 2 consecutive weeks of higher lows on the BX trender, and we've just kept selling off, which is just another reason for me to say no strategy works 100% of the time, and it's important to somewhat diversify your portfolio. This doesn't mean go buy every single one of the top 500 stocks or 500 cryptos, but it also means don't put all your eggs in one basket, because even strategies with 60-something, 70-something% win rates don't work all the time. Because back here in 2023, this BX trender strategy would have worked wonderfully on AMD. But in 2024 and 2025, it's just not been working. But anyways, what would I do on the stock market? Well, personally, I am in on this Tesla trade, which is mentioned over here somewhere on Peter's weekly watch list. Here we go. He thinks it's a very high confidence setup because a whole bunch of strategies align together as I talked about it. So you can obviously go sign up to his newsletter yourself and get access to the email watch list that I just showed you. So I'm in on this Tesla trade. I am also in on Netflix, simply because I saw this really nice green candle here as well. I bought in somewhere in the high 800s. I wish I got the exact low, but we don't buy the exact low, we don't get the exact top, we just take a good chunk out of the middle, as Jason Pizzino always likes to say. So other than that, I'm not really touching anything else. I've taken a very small position on MicroStrategy. However, I may end up getting out at a break even or a very small profit, because as I said, we are approaching resistance, and I am not touching anything else as of the moment. So I will pop over to crypto right now. and let you know what I am doing over there. Bitcoin starting on the weekly time frame, we can see that we have gotten our 2 consecutive higher lows on the BX trender. Now, one thing to take note is crypto is still trading through this Easter long weekend. So this candle could still close with a lower low. Sorry, not this candle, this histogram. But for that to happen, we would have to see a monumental sell-off, something like a 10% or at least a 5%. I think, based on the way this indicator works, we would have to move below the opening price of that bar. So pretty much a 5 to 10% sell-off. But one thing that I really like is last week's candle closed above this diagonal downtrend line for the first time since we made that top on the 20th of January, which is still our current all-time high. So another thing that I have not talked about so far in this video is the stochastic RSI is extremely oversold. But as you can see on the stock market, literally every single thing is oversold, but that does not mean that we are bouncing. Like, this is one thing with momentum indicators, is they'll tell you when something is oversold and overbought, but they won't tell you when like the actual low or the actual top is in, which is why I like to use more advanced indicators like the BX trender and obviously the TIA Gann swing indicator. Now, speaking of the Gann swing indicator, we can see that we are down across the board for both the weekly 1 bar and weekly 2 bar, but we are still holding neutral on the monthly time frame. Moving over to the daily time frame, we can see that we have seen one of Michael Pizzino's favorite signals, 7 or more bars in one swing direction, which usually leads to a pause or a reversal. Now, in this case, we are seeing a pause instead of a reversal. And the reason for that being is, obviously, you can go watch Michael's videos where he talks a lot about time analysis as well as a couple of other things. I'm not going to steal his analysis and pretend it is mine. But if we draw a fib retracement from the... I can't even draw. Where were we drawing from? Sorry, this high right here. The retest of the breakdown from this trend line here, which I will show you in a moment, we are consolidating pretty much right above that important 50% level from the actual breakdown, which means that this is likely reaccumulation. Now, obviously, if you just went off something like the stochastic RSI, you could say, oh, we're so overbought, we have to be due for a correction. But it doesn't work like that. Like, you can sit in overbought for an extremely long period of time and still not see any correction, like we saw here. Like, the stochastic RSI hit 100, or nearly 100, over here on the 9th of November, around 76k. But obviously, we moved all the way up to 93k before we even got a pullback. And pretty much, we moved up until 99k, pretty much 100k, before seeing any decent corrections. So whilst RSIs are a great indicator, I wouldn't rely on them by themselves just for that reason. Anyways, we are consolidating here, which in my opinion actually looks like a bull flag when you jump down to the 4-hour time frame. And by extrapolating this move right here from 78k up to 86k, that gives us a target of around 93k. Now, if I move that slightly to, doesn't matter how I move it, it moves anywhere from around 92k to 93k. And that nearly perfectly lines up with this trend line right here, which I will show you how I got right now. Again, I've stolen this trend line from Michael Pizzino, but pretty much every single person on the internet is using it. It's basically the trend line connecting the two tops from 2021. So quite an important trend line. And obviously this other trend line connecting the 2017 tops to the 2017 cycle top to the 2021 cycle top has also marked our current 2 cycle tops. So both these trend lines are going to be very important. So what I think is going to happen is over the rest of the long weekend, we're going to continue to accumulate above the 50% level at $83,593, plus or minus a little bit, depending on what exchange you're trading on. And we are going to see a pretty explosive move up to 93K before a potential rejection or a correction. And one theory that makes me reach this conclusion is Elliott wave analysis, which I've learned a lot from Jason and Michael and over at the TIA community, where if you see a really flat correctory wave for wave 2, you're going to see a much sharper correctory wave for wave 4. Now, obviously, this can play out on a much larger time frame, like if we're treating, if I can draw this out for you. So if we're treating this as a wave 1 for the whole bull market on the monthly time frame, and this being a wave 2 in 2023, you remember we didn't see any huge scary sell-offs, even though the market was very fearful. And we obviously saw a big pump as our wave 3, but our wave 4 correction, we had a lot of sharp, scary sell-offs before our wave 5 move. Now, I do not think this is the top. I think we'll see a top somewhere around the second half of this year or early 2026. You can go and watch some of Michael Pizzino's videos and Jason's videos as well for where they think the cycle top is in, but pretty much everyone I've watched has said a different date, so only time will tell who is right. So I'm just going to draw that like that. But obviously with every large move, we can break it down into smaller moves. So if we count this as a monthly wave 5, inside of that monthly wave 5, we can get weekly waves. Now, if we're counting something like this as a weekly wave 1, potentially, and this as, I'm using the wrong indicator, excuse me for my ignorance. So if we count this as something like a weekly wave 1, that being a weekly wave 2, we should see a big weekly wave 3, a potential weekly wave 4, and then a weekly wave 5, which we may or may not break that trend line. Who knows? Only time will tell. Now, if we head back over to Cowboy Trades, he dives into some analysis in one of his most recent videos. I believe it is this one, where we talk about how Bitcoin could potentially actually break out of some of the previous trend lines. Obviously, whenever I put myself on the spot, I can never find what I'm looking for. So give me a moment whilst I find this for you. It's probably right here. So it basically means that we should see a really, really explosive move and breakout based on what has happened in the past. Now, obviously, I recommend you go and watch his whole 17-minute video, but if that theory lines up, we could see a wave 5 extension that actually breaks out of the previous trend lines, which is something that Michael Pizzino also talks about in some of his videos, where he says, because we're treating Bitcoin as a commodity and we're nearing the end of the 18.6-year real estate cycle, we could see a very, very explosive wave 5 move that goes to, I don't know, 180K, 200K, like, who knows? But what I think is nearly certain is that the cycle is not over, because if we pop back over to Michael Pizzino and one of his latest videos, I believe it is
cycle now,
because you can see when he talks about every time we break into an all-time high, we see a 30 to 90 day correction, and we are currently at, one day ago was 77 days, so we're now at 78 days. So this means sometime in the next 10 days, we should see a low come in for Bitcoin. But in my opinion, the low is already in for Bitcoin, because as you may have heard me talk about earlier, if if you just ignore all the lines on the chart and focus on this line here, the 50 TMA, which I am going to not change the color of for you, you can see back here, when in August of last year, I said, Bitcoin can dip below the 50 TMA on the weekly time frame, but only briefly, and the bull market will still continue, because we did that in March. We didn't really do that in August, but we did this in September of last year. Sorry, and March and August of 2023. We didn't do that in August last year, but we did that again this year, where we got a wick underneath the 50 TMA. And if we look at the probabilities, that means we should see an absolutely explosive move up from whether it's from 18K to 31K or 25K to 74K or 49K to 100K. So if we want to break that down into a wave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but obviously that would be our daily wave count, and inside of each of these daily waves we could then break them down into 4-hour wave counts. So whilst my big brain right now can't figure out if this is a daily or a 4-hour wave count, either way I still think it's valid, and I think the cycle is not over, and I think once the markets open up next week we should see some pretty explosive moves. Now, I really don't want to end this video without being able to do a proper wave count or continuing to click on the wrong indicator. So let's try that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. So what I needed to do was I basically needed to draw that wave 5 a bit higher, or something like that, so I reach 120K. Now, before I go today, I wanted to point out one more thing that usually happens in the last leg of every cycle. Now, before I do that, I'm going to pop over to the, not the DXY, because I'm pretty bad at reading this chart, but Michael and Jason Pizzino over on their channels do a much better job of reading this chart. I'm going to show you what I see on the USDT dominance. Now, unfortunately for us, the USDT dominance is up on multiple time frames. We are neutral on the monthly 1 bar, thankfully. If it was up, I would have doubts on the cycle, but we are up on the weekly 1 bar and 2 bar. Now, one of the good things is we are making lower highs on the BX trender for the USDT dominance. Now, if you don't know what the USDT dominance is, I suggest you go watch Michael and Jason Pizzino's videos. But basically it means how much money is in USDT. You want less money in USDT and more money in Bitcoin and cryptos for higher prices. So whilst this goes up, the price of Bitcoin and cryptos usually goes down. Anyways, enough of that. But what I am seeing, what I really, really like is obviously lower highs on the BX trender. Because if we go back out and we look at the previous times when we've seen a extended run up and then lower highs, it means that we are very close to the top, and a really good confirmation signal is the TIA GAN swing indicator. You can see back here in June of 2021, we had 2 darker greens, which marked lower highs. Then we made a lower swing top on the GAN swing indicator before the USDT dominance absolutely crashed. And if you remember back then, August 2021, crypto prices started to move up. So I think something like that could very much happen again, because if we have a look here, September of 2023, we started making 2 weeks of lower highs on the BX trender, and then, sorry, I'll just zoom in a bit for you here, 2 weeks of lower highs, and then we made 2 weekly lower swing tops, and then it was obviously absolute dump for the USDT dominance, and obviously big pump for Bitcoin from, what was it, like 27K up to 73K. So I think something like that could play out, but it may not play out immediately, because based on just my back testing of just these 2 data points, which you can do by yourself using all of these free indicators except the TIA GAN swing indicator, which I suggest you go and buy if you don't have it already because it's great, is to obviously wait for the lower weekly swing top as confirmation. Now, similar to what I was saying on the stock market earlier, we don't have confirmation that the low for a lot of the stocks and obviously a lot of the altcoins is in. We have that near confirmation for now for Bitcoin and a couple of the stocks. So if you get in now on those, you've got a much better chance of actually buying closer to the low than if you go and buy some random altcoin or penny stock, because as we make our lower weekly swing tops on the USDT dominance, you could very much see some of the smaller cryptos dump a bit more, whilst I think the low for Bitcoin is already in. And it's going to be the same with the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. We don't have confirmation that the low is in. So even if the S&P 500 makes a equal low, slightly higher low, slightly lower low, some of your crappy penny stocks could easily make a lower low, which again is what Jason always talks about in his videos, where you don't just want to buy something that's cheap because it's cheap. You want to buy something that's good, so when the market really takes off, it goes up, if that makes sense. Yeah, buy high, sell higher, rather than buy low, sell lower, because the buy low and sell high doesn't really work. Anyways, enough of that rant. Over to exchange tokens. We are going to be looking at, why has this chart switched back to BNB? Give me a second. MX, USDT. My internet is being amazing. Bear with me, guys. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is CRO. Obviously, I think we are somewhere here, and we will see a absolutely parabolic move incoming, which lines up with my Bitcoin analysis from earlier. But what I think is signaling this is we are getting higher lows on the BX trender, and it's almost turning green. Now, if we look at what happened a couple of months ago before the obviously Trump mania pump, it went green on the BX trender, but the price didn't really go anywhere. And then all of a sudden, it just shoots off. But not before we got this fake out signal with that single weekly lower low. So obviously, if we look back at the past, we didn't get that fake out signal. We only got this dark green rather than, sorry, no. I'm looking at the wrong spot. Here we are. We actually did get that fake out signal. We got that single dark red, which makes people think we're going to sell off again. And obviously we did sell off a little bit, but after that, it was off to the races. But so I am buying CRO right now around this range in the hopes that we make at least a equal high, which would be nearly a 3x from here, or we see some absolutely parabolic move up. Now, why do I think this parabolic move will happen? Well, if we look at the past, obviously in the past cycles, CRO, when Bitcoin made that higher high in November compared to March, April, CRO also made a higher high. Looking over at BNB, BNB made a slightly lower high, but that was still a 2x or even a 3x plus move depending on how low you got in. So I'm using the same theory for CRO. Even if we only get up to, say, 23 cents as opposed to if we get to 20 cents instead of 23 cents, that's still 250% move for me. Which would probably be the same with BNB. Like, even if BNB double tops at $800, that is still a 50% return on your investment. Now, having a look at MX, the token from XC, from last cycle, when Bitcoin made its higher high, MX also made a higher high. Now, one thing I think CRO is doing similar to MX is we are actually selling off in between each of the Bitcoin pumps. Whilst Bitcoin tends to hold its ground pretty well, CRO has been selling off, which obviously isn't something you want as an investor, but as a trader, it's awesome because you want to buy here, sell up here, and then get another chance to buy here and reload for the next move. But as an investor, you don't want to sell everything. You want to buy here, sell a bit here, sell a bit here, maybe buy back a bit more here, and then sell everything up there. So MEXC, obviously, last cycle has done 11 cents to $3, an absolutely huge move. But then it's come back to 50 cents, which is a much bigger sell-off than what BNB did, going from $30 to $700 and then coming back to $200 and then moving up to $600 and something. So obviously the second move on MEXC went from 50 cents to 370, which is pretty much a 7x move. So I think the way CRO is behaving, we're much more likely to see this bigger parabolic pump as compared to a double top or lower high. Now, obviously, I could be wrong because, as Jason always says, you want to buy into things. You don't just want to be buying something that's cheap because it's cheap. You want to be buying into something that is in a position of strength. Now, obviously, in this last cycle, if you had followed that logic, you would have still made pretty good money on BNB. But if you had taken on the risk of buying something that's cheap, like CRO and MX, you'd have made even higher returns. Now, obviously, you could have easily bought some crappy altcoin that didn't make a higher high, that just absolutely dumped into oblivion. I'm just going to use Gods as an example here. But yeah, so I don't think this is the best example, but let's use Injective, which is another one of the Jason Pizzino examples. Here, Injective, it does very well in the start of the cycle. Big move. That's like what, 500x? Is it? No, I literally can't math. That's a 50x. Comes back down to $13, and then it pumps back up to $35. That's still a really nice tradable range. You've made 200 and something, maybe close to 300%. But if you're chasing those absolutely parabolic moves, you want something that's going to make a higher high or much higher high rather than just a equal high like Bitcoin did last cycle. Now, obviously, this then comes down to your personal risk management. Like, how many failed investments are you going to get in to get one successful investment? Or do you just want to stick to something that is much lower risk but also lower reward? So personally for me, I'm going to trade all of them, but I'm going to use position size management. I'm obviously going to go in much harder on Bitcoin just because I find the analysis is a lot easier and I have much higher win rate on Bitcoin personally. I'm sitting in the high 70s for my derivatives trades on Bybits, my leverage positions, and obviously never lost a spot position on Bitcoin because we're just going higher and higher every cycle. You hold long enough, you'll be in a profit. Whilst obviously with a lot of other cryptos, including my favorite DOT, if you hold long enough, that does not guarantee you're going to be in a profit. Anyways, I've talked long enough. Thank you all for watching, and if you're enjoying my content, please like, comment, and subscribe. And yeah, let's all hope that Bitcoin does something nice for us next week. Happy Easter. Goodbye.